It was a cold evening in November when I first noticed the sounds coming from my basement. I had just moved into this old house, a charming relic from the 1950s. The previous owners had left it in disarray, and as a young woman living alone, I relished the challenge of restoring it. I spent countless nights painting the walls and rearranging furniture, but the basement remained untouched. It was dark, damp, and filled with boxes of old belongings. One night, while I was settling in with a cup of tea, I heard it, a low shuffling sound emanating from the basement. I froze, straining to listen. The noise was muffled, like someone dragging their feet across the concrete floor. My heart raced as I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just the house settling, I thought, but deep down, I felt something was off. After several nights of similar noises, I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, I descended the creaking wooden stairs. The air grew colder as I reached the bottom, and my light flickered ominously. I scanned the room, revealing old furniture draped in dust-covered sheets and boxes stacked haphazardly against the walls. As I moved deeper into the basement, I heard it again, a soft thud, followed by the sound of something scraping against the wall. I shone my light toward the sound, my pulse quickening. Nothing. Just shadows and silence. Determined to confront whatever was causing the noise, I stepped further in. My foot landed on something soft, a crumpled newspaper. Bending down, I noticed it was from 3 days prior. My stomach twisted. It was impossible for it to be down here. I had checked the basement before. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper, a voice, barely audible, but distinctly human. "Help me." It sent chills down my spine. I called out, my voice shaking, "Who's there?" Silence responded. I turned to leave, but just as I did, the sound of shuffling returned, closer this time. I bolted for the stairs, but the darkness enveloped me like a thick fog. I tripped, the flashlight clattering from my hand, flickering out as I fell. In the darkness, I could hear the heavy breathing of someone or something behind me. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet and raced up the stairs. I burst through the door and slammed it shut, locking it behind me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I pressed my back against the door, half expecting it to burst open. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. In the morning, I called the police. They arrived quickly, searching the basement thoroughly, but found nothing. "It's probably just an animal," the officer said, trying to reassure me. But I knew better. The whispers had been too real. Weeks passed, and I avoided the basement at all costs. Then one afternoon, while organizing my living room, I found an old key hidden in the back of a drawer. It was rusty, and as I turned it in my fingers, a terrible thought crossed my mind. I raced to the basement door, my heart pounding. The key fit perfectly in the lock. I opened the door, the musty air hitting me like a wall. I turned on the flashlight, this time steeling myself. The basement was empty, just as before, but something compelled me to look behind the old furniture. I shuffled over to a large, covered armchair and pulled off the sheet. My breath caught in my throat. Beneath it, a small trapdoor lay hidden in the floor. I hadn't noticed it before. Without thinking, I knelt down and lifted it, revealing a narrow shaft that descended into darkness. I hesitated but felt an irresistible urge to look inside. Leaning forward, I aimed my flashlight down the hole. The beam illuminated the walls, and I gasped as I saw fresh scratch marks carved into the wood, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. Then, from the depths, came that same whisper, "Help me." With a rush of adrenaline, I slammed the door shut and locked it. I backed away, panting heavily, my mind racing. That night, I packed my things and left the house behind. The whispers still echoed in my mind as I drove away, never looking back. I later learned that the previous owners had vanished without a trace. To this day, I wonder if they ever found their way back up. Growing up, I had always heard stories about my grandparents' house. It was old, a sprawling Victorian that had seen generations of family life. My parents were often vague about the basement, whispering of secrets and darkness that lived within its walls. As a curious teenager, I was determined to uncover what they had kept hidden. When my grandparents passed away, my parents decided to sell the house, but they invited me to help clean it out first. It was bittersweet, nostalgic yet eerie. The scent of old wood and dust filled the air as I walked through the rooms. Finally, I stood before the basement door, a heavy, weathered slab of wood that seemed to resist my every thought of entering. With a deep breath, I grasped the knob and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a staircase that spiraled down into darkness. I hesitated, feeling a chill run down my spine, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I flicked on the light switch at the top, and a single bulb flickered to life, illuminating the cluttered space below. The basement was filled with old furniture, discarded toys, and boxes of forgotten memories. I started to sift through the items, each piece pulling at the threads of my childhood. But as I rummaged, I found myself increasingly drawn to a large, dusty trunk in the corner. When I finally pried it open, I was hit with the musty scent of old fabric. Inside were stacks of old photographs, letters, and clothes. As I pulled out a faded dress, I noticed something strange. A small leather-bound journal wedged at the bottom. I opened it carefully, scanning the pages filled with my grandmother's neat handwriting. The entry started out mundane daily life, family gatherings, but soon turned darker. She wrote of a man who had lived in the neighborhood, someone with a troubled past. He had a fascination with my family, watching from the shadows, and my grandmother feared for their safety. My heart raced as I read further. She described a series of incidents, strange noises at night, missing items, and the sensation of being watched. The final entry was chilling. I hear him in the basement. I can feel his presence lurking in the shadows. I must hide this journal. It is my only defense. I glanced around the basement, suddenly feeling very small. I closed the journal, but the sense of dread lingered. It was as if the darkness had shifted around me. Then, I heard it, a faint rustling sound from the far corner of the basement. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I strained to listen, and the rustling grew louder, followed by a soft thud. I shone my flashlight toward the sound, my breath hitching. There, at the edge of the light, I saw a figure, a man, hunched over, obscured by shadows. I stumbled back, tripping over a box. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the confined space. The figure straightened, revealing a gaunt face with hollow eyes. He grinned, a smile that sent chills racing down my spine. "I'm just looking for something," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Panic surged through me. I turned to run, but the darkness seemed to close in. The man lunged, and I barely dodged him, sprinting for the stairs. My legs felt heavy, like I was running through molasses. I reached the door and flung it open, almost tumbling into the hallway. I slammed it shut behind me, leaning against it, gasping for breath. My parents were upstairs, completely unaware of what had just happened. I could hear the man pounding on the basement door, his shouts mingling with my own fear. "Let me out," he screamed. "I just want to talk." I raced to my parents, my heart hammering. They were in the living room, sorting through old pictures, oblivious. "There's someone in the basement," I gasped, my voice trembling. My dad exchanged a worried look with my mom. "What do you mean?" he asked, standing up. I couldn't wait for their disbelief. "Call the police," I shouted, and before they could react, I rushed back to the basement door, adrenaline coursing through me. I opened it just enough to see down the stairs, but the basement was silent now. I called out, "Are you still there?" No response. My dad came up behind me, gripping my shoulder tightly. "What did you see?" he asked. "I don't know. There was a man." But as I spoke, the realization hit me. My grandparents had never told us the whole story. The fear etched in their faces suddenly made sense. The police arrived shortly after, searching the basement thoroughly, but they found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no traces of a man, just dust and shadows. The officer assured us it was likely an old memory playing tricks on me. We locked up the house for good that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still down there, hidden in the dark. As we drove away, I glanced back at the house, a silhouette against the night sky. I could almost hear my grandmother's voice, warning me to stay away from the basement. I never returned. After years of renting, I finally bought my own home. It was a modest split level, perfect for a fresh start. I loved everything about it, especially the old charm it exuded. However, there was one room in the basement that was locked, a small nondescript door that had been painted over multiple times. The previous owner had left the key behind, but I resisted the urge to unlock it for months. One rainy afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I was home alone, the sound of raindrops drumming against the windows providing a perfect backdrop for exploration. I retrieved the key from my drawer and stood before the locked door, my heart racing with anticipation. Turning the key, I felt a thrill of excitement. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The walls were bare, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. But what caught my eye was a single chair in the center, facing a wall covered with old newspaper clippings. As I stepped inside, the air felt heavy. I moved closer to the wall, scanning the articles. They were all about local disappearances of young people, all vanishing without a trace over the last few decades. My stomach churned as I read the names, recognizing a few of them from stories I had heard growing up. Suddenly, I heard a soft sound behind me, a faint scuffle, like something shifting. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but the room was empty, just my shadow dancing in the dim light. I chalked it up to my imagination, but unease settled in my chest. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to take pictures of the clippings. As I snapped photos, I felt a creeping sensation, as if I were being watched. I turned again, but still nothing. Just then, my phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from a friend asking how I was settling in. I replied quickly and took another picture, but when I turned back, something caught my eye, a movement just outside the door. I stepped closer to the entrance, peering into the dim hallway. It was a fleeting shadow, but it felt too real to dismiss. Panic gripped me, and I closed the door, locking it behind me. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to confront it. I tried to shake off the fear, but the weight of the room pressed on me. I went back to the clippings, determined to uncover their secrets. Each article detailed the missing person, the last known sightings, and theories about their disappearances. It was a grim collection that painted a dark history of the neighborhood. Then, something caught my attention. A small note tucked behind one of the articles. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. It read, "They're still here. Watch your back." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I glanced at the door. I felt an overwhelming urge to leave. I started to back away, but before I could reach the door, I heard it again. The soft scuffle, followed by a low whisper. "Help me." My heart raced as I fumbled with the doorknob. It wouldn't budge. I twisted it desperately, panic flooding my mind. I was trapped. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices echoing in the small space. "Help me. Let me out." Frantically, I banged on the door, yelling for help, but there was no one to hear me. I felt a rush of terror. I was completely alone. The voices surrounded me, growing louder and more insistent. And in that moment, I understood these were the voices of those who had disappeared. Suddenly, I remembered the articles. They had all gone missing in this very house, their last known whereabouts pointing directly to the basement. I took a step back. Finally, with a surge of adrenaline, I threw myself against the door, and it gave way. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it tight. I could still hear the whispers behind it, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lay within. I fled the house, the echoes of those lost souls following me as I drove away. I never returned to that house, and I never found out what happened to the others. All I know is that some doors are best left locked, and some histories are too dark to uncover.